This is a topic that is really dear to me. Narcissistic abuse, toxic relationships. And yeah, I had a few thoughts on it that I wanted to share today. A lot of us on a spiritual and emotional healing journey have had a period of time or a big chunk of our life where we were very much entangled with toxic caregivers or toxic romantic relationships. And many people who identify themselves as an empath or a highly sensitive person have found their way into these types of relationships due to their extremely caring, patient, and understanding nature, and possibly lack of ability to see red flags. It's important that we understand everything we can about things that affect us. So if people with narcissistic traits have showed up more than once in our lives and have become somewhat of a pattern, the more we can understand about this topic, the better. So, understanding those with narcissistic traits has been very important in my own healing process. These people do not behave like you because they are not wired like you. We seem to believe that all people are generally similar, but this is actually totally delusional. It's totally delusional. Under the hood, we all have very different wiring based on our first 7 years of life and how we responded to our environments, as well as the genetics that come into play. So if you could see someone's energetic makeup, you would see people are operating in very, very different ways of perceiving and feeling. People with narcissistic traits have experienced some very, very deep trauma early on in their life that set their development on a very different course than what I would say a normal person, a person who can feel empathy. This deep trauma does not justify or excuse their behavior of you. They do that at your expense, as they're acting like an opportunist there. But this is kind of how they get to be like they are. So they're wired in a very different way, and what they experienced way back early in life caused this to develop, severing them from developing the heart center, developing empathy, and it can cause them to bully when bullying suits them and they can have that opportunity. It causes them to gaslight a softer person. It can make them feel like they're always in comparison, in competition, and want to destroy anyone who might question their behavior. Because to them, this way of being is how they survive. It's how they survive. They're very much in a heightened ego state where that facade of the ego, that mask, whatever they've developed as them, is the only part of them they can access. They're not able to access spirit in the same way. They're not able to access their heart center, their inner child in a healing way. So they just have this really tight persona, this really tight ego representation. So if that gets questioned or that gets destroyed, they're completely, in their experience, they're nothing, because they can't access those deeper and higher states. So whether they seem like it or not, they're very much in survival. And you will know this if you have ever addressed the behavior of this type of person to them directly. They can act in a tantrum-like, childlike, schoolyard bullying, kind of petty way into adulthood, because their development kind of stopped way back when. So anyone who behaves like this in an ongoing way and is unwilling to address the behavior is actually in a very dark place and is very much disconnected from empathy, from heart, from the light of divinity. And they're in constant fear of being exposed, constant fear of having their old pain triggered somehow. And the reason they love to have a gentle, bright, loving person close by allows them to be near divine love, to be near vibrance, because that's something they cannot source within themselves. This is why also you'll find these types of people prone to cheating or to addictions, because they're unable to source good feelings within themselves, in their heart. And because deep down they're really frightened of losing this gentle, loving person that they have in some ways under their control, they will watch that person's behavior closely and do things that manipulate and control so that they can avoid losing that person. And it can get to the point of abuse where they're wearing that person down, and making them feel small, so that person doesn't have like the inner empowerment to get up and leave, and they'll just stay around forever. And so the type of person targeted would be a gentle, loving person who also has a vulnerable self-esteem, poorly developed boundaries, a weak outside support system. So we are vulnerable to this stuff if we had a caregiver, a parent that behaved in this way, because as a very young child, we relied 100% on our parents and our caregivers. We had no outside sources of support, and we probably had no idea that there was toxic behavior happening in our home, because this is all we knew. So you're not to blame. For the rest of your life, keep reminding yourself you're not to blame for the way that other people show up towards you. We're only responsible for how we react and respond. You arrived on earth blind as a human child, as a baby, and found yourself in a situation that you didn't even realize should be red flagged. You didn't even realize anything was wrong because that's all you knew. You couldn't remember anything before birth. And so it's really easy. It's pretty normal, actually, to find your way into an adult romantic partnership with the same type of a toxic person, someone with narcissistic traits, because you're used to it. You know how to understand and navigate it. You're almost an expert, and you don't see the red flags in these, adult romantic partners that other people might see if they grew up in a more structured, a more caring and respectful home. So you're a bright light. To a person with narcissistic traits, you might appear very smart, hardworking, attractive, patient, all these kinds of things that they wish that they had in themselves, but have been unable to find or cultivate due to that kind of stunted growth of their heart. So having you around, being associated with you being some type of a charm bracelet for them, they see you as an extension of themselves, someone that they own, and all the things that they are not. And having you can make them feel a lot better about themselves and their shortcomings. So associating with you in these qualities give their ego a great boost, and they feed off this energy. And again, they can't source this within themselves. So having you there available as this energy source is a perfect situation for them. And it's not uncommon for them to need you to be a certain way. They might want to control or just subtly manipulate where you go, who your friends are, who you spend time with, what you wear, even how you do your hair. They might make comments about your appearance that are really inappropriate and disrespectful in order to control you to be a certain way. And if you, in their mind, if you can be their version of perfect, they will feel super. They will feel super. They don't want to do the work themselves to become these things. It's too difficult for them. They don't know how. So they want to take a shortcut by having you become all these things on their behalf. And if this has happened to you from childhood, if you had a parent that never lived up to their dreams and has narcissistic traits, there might have been a lot of pressure on you to be very perfect, to achieve things that they never got to achieve, to get the grades that they couldn't, to look more perfect and beautiful than they ever could have looked. And this is a really difficult and tight squeeze to put a brand new little child in and have that child grow up under such extreme pressure. So, most normally developed people do have access to the part of them that stops themselves from behaving this way, that stops themselves from lashing out and harming other people regularly or when they're questioned. Most normally developed people can find within themselves that energy of love, even if it's just a little bit, for themselves and some compassion for those in their environment. But for people with these toxic patterns, they're very much disconnected and haven't developed this part, which is what makes them and their wiring a little different or a lot different. So on our healing journey, a point comes where grace comes to us and we start to understand that we're in a situation that's not exactly normal, that might never change and might be getting worse, that is not safe. And something inside of us realizes that we don't have to live like this forever. But we might not know what to do. We might not know where to start, how to get out, what normal or respectful would even look like, or is that even available to us? Is that an option? Getting out is easier said than done because your entire life is entwined with, enmeshed with, and built around a person that has made you behave and influenced you to think in a certain way that is not healthy. And so you might not have a lot of self-esteem left. You might not believe in yourself the way that you would like to. So if you're watching this and you're still in it, if you're still in the thick of it, in this type of a relationship, this process of creating space from a toxic person, a toxic relationship, is not just like turning on a switch one day. It's okay if it's a slow realization of where you're at, what needs to be changed, and what you want your life to look like. This is really big, life-changing stuff. It's important to release any judgment about the situation and why you're there and how long you've been there and all that. All that matters is that you keep going. All that matters is that you keep walking. You keep putting one foot in front of the other, watching videos like this, reading books on this topic, reaching out to an expert, a therapist, someone who understands narcissistic abuse. The fact that you're looking into this topic, even if you're still in the thick of all this, is a sign that your inner guide is calling you to something higher in the next phase of your life. So, for many of us, we have gotten out of the situation of being entangled with a person with narcissistic traits. We've gone no contact, we've moved on, we've created an appropriate amount of space if we aren't able to fully go no contact. So we've made those very challenging and very courageous moves, and we're on this healing journey. But that's why it's called a journey, because so many things come up in the aftermath. We've lived huge chunks of our lives being affected by these kind of dynamics, and it would only make sense that it takes another huge chunk of our life to sort through all the nuances, all the subtleties, all the memories, anything that surfaces often unexpectedly. It's important to, when you're feeling through some of this stuff, when it comes up like a painful wave, it's important to be aware of semi-safe people. Semi-safe people. These are people who definitely care, might be a good friend or acquaintance or family member, but they haven't actually experienced firsthand the type of abuse that you've experienced, and therefore their feedback might not be helpful to you. So be aware of semi-safe people. So they might give criticism that sounds like help because they want you to move on. It might even come across as moral superiority. And your story and your current experience of processing could be dismissed just so that the listener can feel more comfortable. They might feel like they need to come up with an easy solution for the problem so that this uncomfortable, painful thing that's happening for you kind of gets out of their face too. You might even have someone pushing you towards reconciliation efforts. You could have a family member telling you that you should let go the way that they've let go, yet that family member is still actually living with poor self-esteem, poor boundaries, and doesn't stand up for themselves in their relationships. Anyone who's actually actively working through trauma or who has worked through a lot of their trauma would not just tell someone to move on and just let it go like a one-time switch, because they understand that it doesn't work that way. And I like to think that this is one meaning of Christ's words when he said, "Don't cast your pearls before swine." Be careful who you talk to. Be careful who you talk to in your tender moments. And again, it doesn't mean these semi-safe people are bad or have bad intentions. They're just not understanding the depths in the way that you might need when you're going through a wave of pain in your healing. Also, forgiveness. There's a lot of people talking about what needs to be done when it comes to forgiveness. What is the moral thing to do? How to manage forgiveness when it comes to getting out of narcissistic abuse. It's normal, and I would say perfectly okay, if the idea of forgiveness doesn't sit well with you. If you're kind of in that place and maybe you feel anger or hatred flaring up about the situation years after the fact, so you want to let it go, but you don't really know like how to navigate. There are a few different things that we can do in a continuum, in a process. One small goal could be the goal of accepting that person the way that they are. Accepting that person the way that they are. Accepting that that is their way of being. Accepting that they might not, probably are not going to change that way of being in this life. It doesn't mean we accept what happened and that their behavior is okay, but we must at some point accept that this is their MO, and they, in a free will universe, have the right to go on the pattern of behavior that they want to go on. You can accept that's that person's trajectory, and you can have no desire to be around them if they haven't changed. That would be a healthy way to look at it. And in that, never tolerating that type of thing again from them or anyone else. We'll probably find forgiveness points along the way in our healing, even beautiful, spontaneous forgiveness points where maybe you process an old memory and you really feel into it and you release some grief or some anger. And in the future, that memory no longer holds that intense charge in your body. That emotional charge is gone. And you can really forgive what happened in that old memory, in that circumstance, and make peace with that. And then, a year later, another memory that you totally forgot about surfaces and brings this whole new wave of pain. And it's easy to think, oh my goodness, like I thought I had done some forgiveness. What is this? Like, did I not forgive? Like, did I not move? No, often because these hurtful situations, these difficult situations come at different points in our timeline. They might come up in waves throughout our lives for processing and forgiveness, because if we're in a relationship with a toxic person for 20 years, it's impossible for the brain and the heart to just forgive that all in one fell swoop, because all of the circumstances and the memories, they all have their own unique energy signature. They have their own lessons to be learned. They have their own releasing to do. And so it's very normal if you start to hit forgiveness points later in your healing journey, but many of them over time. Also, there are a few I would say, meditations or visualizations or release feelings. And so some people might say, okay, so how do I do my healing work? I'm out of this toxic relationship, but I still feel angry. I still have stuff come up. I don't feel fully ready to do a full one switch forgiveness. Like, how do I do healing work? That sounds vague. There are a few really beautiful things that have worked for me and that I continue to use when things come up. And they're really easy. It just takes 5 minutes in silence with no one around. The first thing that I like to do is feel into relief. Feel into relief. And that is relief that the worst of that situation is over. I'm no longer in a connection, in a relationship with a person with narcissistic traits. I feel really relieved that I've made it through something that many people haven't yet been able to leave. Feel relief that now there's an awareness of, okay, I'm going to discern. I'm going to kind of test with time and intuition my future relationships to be sure that I don't enter into a similar one. I'm relieved that I have that asset now after everything that I've been through. So even just now, just taking a moment to feel relief if you've made space, even space of any kind, from a toxic person or an abusive person. Feel relieved that you're going to be vigilant and not ever relive that in the physical here and now. And noticing what relief does to our body and to our spirit, how it just kind of, I've made it through. The worst is over. And so I like to go to relief when I start to go into one of these points that comes up that might spontaneously surface during my healing. And any feelings that come, whether it's anger or grief or even self-doubt, self-hatred, just feeling them fully and knowing that they are not you. They're just residual things that are moving through, that are passing through temporarily and on their way out. And we can support those difficult emotions to move out by just feeling them fully. They're not going to last, for too long. So feel them as they go so that you don't suppress them and they come back later. And notice the pain body when these frustrations come up about what's happened. Notice the pain body, which is kind of like a universal heaviness, which some people feel more than others, but it's kind of there in all humans. We share this. And that pain body, it's not us. It's a residual energy from past events. It might cause us to feel frantic or angry or overwhelmed, especially when it's associated with everything that's happened in a toxic relationship. And the best way to deal with the pain body, because it's something that shows up on and off in people's lives, is not to suppress it, not to fight it, not to get distracted and run away, because it's going to come back later. To kind of just observe it. Like, oh, okay, interesting. The pain body's here. This is part of being human. This is an energy that I can observe that's not me. And I can create a bit of space from it. I am innocence, purity, love. experiencing the pain body, which is the residual from old stuff. And I'm okay with it being here to observe because it's not me. It's not a forever thing. And as uncomfortable as it is, I'm just going to be with it in this moment. Because as we all know, whatever we resist persists. But if we can just observe, this pain body can pass through. The last thing is to revisit over and over who you have become so far as a result from being involved with toxic people. Even if it's still very fresh, even if you still haven't created the space that you hope to create, what patience and what empathy and what human understanding have you developed so far that wouldn't have come to you, that you wouldn't have cultivated had you not found yourself entangled with a toxic person? If you have cut ties and created space, then take a look at how you are on the leading edge of resiliency, setting an example for other people, and identifying behaviors that you're not okay with, and taking the courage to step away from them if they are ongoing. If others come to you with their trauma, you have a fresh, more developed way of holding space for their expressions. You're someone who can guide others who are a few steps behind you in the process, even if you still feel raw sometimes. This is really, really profound, heavy stuff if you're someone in recovery from abuse. I just want to say it again because it's so important. Don't expect to be understood by everyone, and be aware of semi-safe people when you're sharing, when you're processing, when you're venting. Really choose where you do that so that you're not criticized and belittled in the middle of an already very tender and raw process. Other people, even if they're really well-meaning, might not be able to comprehend the layers and the depth to all that you are moving through in your healing. And it is a really sacred process. So your speech and your sharing really should be held with sacred holding. With sacred holding. Really reserve it for the right people. And keep walking. All of us who are on this path, it is an ongoing thing. Keep walking. Many people watching this probably know the story of Chiron in Greek mythology, and he's known as the wounded healer. And I'm not going to tell his entire story, but basically he was wounded with a poisonous arrow. It was an accident, and he continued to live and continued to live with this painful, poisonous wound. But he ended up becoming, I might have the details wrong, but he ended up becoming an expert in healing, an expert in medicine. And I think most of us are led to believe that he was able to become such an expert because of his wound. And in the mythology, the wound doesn't completely heal over, but he learns to work with it. He works with the energy that was created by that wound in order to create healing modalities. So find the Chiron in you. If you resonate with this content, it's definitely in you. That's where we're going. Thank you.